Hello everyone, I welcome you back for these 5 editorials of the week series. We took a prelims break. We are meeting after a month in the 7th edition of the 5 editorials of the week series. So, in this initiative, we will be identifying the 5 important and most relevant editorials which came in the Hindu with respect to UPSC mains point of view, and we will be discussing those editorials in details. We will be identifying 5 points from each editorials, which means that when we discuss 5 editorials, it is going to be 25 points. So, 25 points a week will be assured. So why we started this initiative is everyone are studying editorials, but not all of us are taking proper notes or revising it regularly. So if you are doing it, it is not of any use. So we are discussing 5 important editorials of each week, and we are taking those 25 points. At the end of the 40 weeks, we will be having 1000 points. So these 1000 points we can take directly to the mains, and we can remember and recall in mains examination, and we can write it in our answers. So our only aim is to study these 1000 points and recall it in mains and score marks. And today we will discuss another 5 important editorials which came in this week. The 5 editorial which we are going to discuss today is, the first one is about the transforming business and insolvency system. It is about how to streamline the insolvency and bankruptcy code. And the second one is about the unconstitutional nature of the farm acts which the government brought recently. And the third one is about the flood management system or flood forecasting system, which is very important with respect to disaster management point of view. And the fourth one is about reimagining India's education, which is relevant for the essay preparation. And the last one is about the gene editing technology, for which the Nobel Prize was awarded. Let us go into the video. The first editorial for the day which we are going to see is about the transforming the business and the insolvency system. So this editorial talks about the what are all the further reforms that needed in the insolvency and bankruptcy code. So before going into this editorial, we have to understand the necessity of this of the insolvency and bankruptcy code. So this article is written by Mr. Rajiv Kumar and Desh Gaurav Shekri. So they were special officers within Niti Aayog. So officers from Niti Aayog are writing this article, and hence the quality. Before going into this editorial, let us understand the necessity for the insolvency and bankruptcy system. So, Economic Survey of 2016 described about a problem which Indian economy is facing, and they called it as the Chakravyuha problem. According to this Chakravyuha problem, we know in Mahabharata, Abhimanyu could enter this Chakravyuha, but he couldn't come out of it. So, similarly, the business firms which are entering into the economy, they are starting their business easily, but they are not able to come out of the business in case if they face any losses. So whenever the firms are facing any loss, it is difficult for them to cope with this loss and continue the business. So this is one thing which they can do whenever they are facing a loss. Either they can cope with the loss and continue the business. Second thing is close the business in a smooth way. That is by declaring insolvency and bankruptcy, they can close the business in a smooth way and come out of it. So according to this Chakravyuha problem which Indian economy is facing, what the economic survey said was, in India you can easily start a business, but it is very difficult to close a business in case of insolvency. So parallelly, whenever these companies are facing loss, the banks which gave loans to these companies are also facing the losses, okay, because they would have given loans to them. Since these firms are facing the loss, they couldn't pay back the loan, so this loan payment is not coming back, and that's why banks are also facing the loss because of the NPA, because the loan which they gave to the firm was becoming NPA because of these losses. So since these firms are facing the loss, banks are also facing the loss, and this NPA crisis is growing. So this is called as twin balance sheet problem. The twin balance sheet problem is both the balance sheet of the banks and the firms are in the problem. So in order to alleviate this problem only, government launched this insolvency and bankruptcy code. So government brought in this insolvency and bankruptcy code in 2016 in order to expedite the process of insolvency. Whenever a company is facing losses, this code will providing a set of guidelines and procedures through which the company can come out of the losses, and the resolution process can go in a similar way, and banks are also able to recover their loan whichever they gave to them and reduce the losses. So this insolvency and bankruptcy code reduces the loss for both the firms and the banks and helps in removing this twin balance sheet problem. So this is the background story. So go and study about the insolvency and bankruptcy code in a detailed way. So now let us come back to this editorial. This editorial talks about the streamlining of the insolvency and bankruptcy code. Already we are having this code, but further a few reforms are needed, and this editorial talks about the reforms needed. So this can be a potential question in the mains too. In the mains they can ask or critically analyze the insolvency and bankruptcy code. If the questions are asked in such a way, we need points to write. So those points are given in this editorial. So the first point is implementation of insolvency and bankruptcy code along with the GST has improved the ease of doing business in India. India was almost ranked at 142. In 2014, India was ranked at 142 in the ease of doing business report of the World Bank. In 2019, we improved to the rank of 63. Almost 70 ranks we have improved in a span of 6 years. And one of the crucial reform is this implementation of insolvency and bankruptcy code and GST. And this has also improved the attraction of FDI. The foreign direct investments started to increase after 2016 because of the implementation of insolvency and bankruptcy code, and this initiative will also help in India to move towards Make for World. Our Prime Minister recently in Independence Day speech announced that from Make in India we have to move towards Make for World. So India should emerge as the manufacturing hub for this world. So for that this will improve the ease of doing business and further attract more foreign investments and improve the manufacturing capability. So why this insolvency and bankruptcy code is a success, that is also is being given. So this editorial perfectly does the critical analysis. It talks about the positives and it talks about the areas where the reform is needed. So the short time bound process. See, this insolvency and bankruptcy code provides a time bound process of 180 days. Within 180 days you have to finish the entire resolution process. In India, if you could think, it is almost 1400 days. It takes 1400 days for a court case to complete. Whenever a company in dispute goes to a court, it is taking 1400 days to complete. So that is one of the major hindrance for ease of doing business, and this insolvency and bankruptcy code mandates that it should be completed within 180 days. So that short time bound process improves the resolution processes efficiency and productivity, and it focuses more on resolution than on liquidation. So we have to understand this point. We have to understand the difference between the resolution and liquidation. So whenever when a firm is facing a loss, it has two options. Either it can go for a resolution or it can go for liquidation, that is closing down of the business. Resolution means solving the loss and trying to cope up with the loss, and liquidation means closing the entire business. Earlier, because of this delay of 1400 days, whenever there is a loss and whenever there is a court case going on with respect to a firm, the firm initially, when the loss used to come, they were in the stage of resolution itself. That is, they could have coped up with the loss if the case would have ended up earlier. Just because there is a huge delay of almost 4 years with respect to court cases, the company couldn't bear the loss and the interest mounting up over the years, and hence it is being forced to go into the liquidation, that is the closure. So if it would have completed earlier, it would have finished with the resolution itself. But since because of the delay of resolution process, the company which could have successfully done the resolution is moving towards liquidation. That is, it has to, instead of coping up with the loss, it is forced to close the business, so and face the loss. So that is the criteria that was happening. But this insolvency and bankruptcy code, by reducing the time limit, and it also aims towards resolution. So the main aim of the insolvency and bankruptcy code and the insolvency professionals is to successfully end the resolution and to help the company in coping up with the losses. So the mindset of the resolution process itself is changed because of this particular initiative. The second positive is, after this initiative, it has instilled a lot of investor confidence. Now investor is confident. Even if we invest in India and that investment goes into loss, we are having a robust resolution process through which we can cope up with the loss. So that has instilled the investor confidence. That is one point. Second is, creditors are recouping their investments. That is, earlier, whenever there is a loss, the amount of returns that is coming to the bank. See, bank is giving loan to a firm. Whenever there is a loss with respect to firm, the amount of returns which bank which could take back is very less. Now that has improved, and it has also improved the credit flow to and from within the India. Because of this NPA crisis, the banks couldn't further expand with respect to the credits because already existing loans became NPA. So now they couldn't give any new loans. Now because of this insolvency and bankruptcy code, the credit flow has improved because of the investor confidence. So these are all the positive points. Now see, everyone can write about these positive points. Everyone can write that it has improved the time bound, it is a time bound process, it has improved, it is focusing on resolution. All can write this. But whenever we are writing the answer, we have to substantiate with the facts. So the recovery rate which the banks, when a bank is giving a loan to a firm, imagine when the bank is giving a loan of 100 rupees to a firm, if this firm is undergoing the losses, earlier the recovery rate was only 26 rupees. If at all the firm is going to face any loss and they have to face the insolvency process, the amount of loan which the bank was recovered was only 26 rupees. Now it has improved threefold. Now after this insolvency and bankruptcy code, they can recover up to 71 rupees. So that is what they are mentioning. The recovery rate for the banks after the insolvency and bankruptcy code was introduced is threefold rise from 26% to 71%. So that is one improvement. Another improvement is the time taken for the solving the process has reduced from 4.3 years to 1.6 years. So this is a very big advantage. Now we have to focus on moving from the 1.6 years to almost 6 months. So this should be our ultimate target. So by quoting these facts in your answers quality will improve. Everyone can write these generic points, but these facts will improve the quality of your answers whenever there is a question with respect to insolvency and bankruptcy code. And if there is any question regarding the transformation of Indian economy or any question regarding the how economic reforms are taking place in India, we can write about this also in generic answers or in essays also. Okay. So further streamlining. So what is the further reforms that are being needed? So now we saw about the positives. Now where the further reforms are needed, that is also being discussed. So first thing is decriminalization of minor offences. So this author who is writing this editorial is also part of the committee under Niti Aayog, which is working on further reforms with respect to insolvency and bankruptcy code. So that Niti Aayog has suggested that we have to decriminalize the minor offences. Earlier, whenever a firm would have taken a decision with respect to a business decision, they would have taken the business decision in a good faith. Good faith means they would have taken the decision in order to improve the profit or for the growth of the company. But that decision would have been an error, and that would have led to the fall of the company. Okay, like we are having a company called Dream 11. Dream 11 has taken a decision to fund the IPL, to sponsor the IPL. So this is a decision which was taken in a good faith by the company in order to improve the company's prospects and to emerge. But that would have led to failure also. We don't know what is going to happen. That might lead to failure also. If that is going to lead to a failure and that is going to affect the shareholders and that is going to create a loss and shareholders are going affected, means earlier such kind of offences were considered as a criminal offences, and now what this Niti Aayog is suggesting is we have to differentiate between good faith mistakes and intentional bad faith actions. So there is another case of Vijay Mallya. So Vijay Mallya, what he did, he took loans from all the banks and he spent the money for personal benefits, and instead of spending it for the company, and that's why company faced the loss and went. So there is some intentional bad faith action with respect to Vijay Mallya. But with respect to this example, see, I don't know about Dream 11, I'm just taking an example. With respect to this example, sometimes company would have taken a step with respect to good faith and that would have led to some mistake. So there you should not criminalize the administrators of the company. So we have to differentiate between the good faith mistakes and intentional bad faith actions. So if at all an administrator is doing any bad an action which is in a bad faith, like the one which happened with respect to Vijay Mallya, there we have to criminalize the owners and not with respect to the good faith mistakes. So that is the first recommendation which they are giving, which we have to incorporate in the insolvency and bankruptcy code. So what they are doing, we have to just penalize them. So we can put some penalty with respect to the good faith mistake, but we should not criminalize them. We should only take action against the bad faith one. So that is what the author is recommending. Second one is we have to roll out the commercial courts. So in 2015, Government of India passed the act called Commercial Courts Appellate Act, which provided for a separate bench in order to deal with the commercial cases in the high courts. It stated that every high court should have a separate commercial bench in order to deal with the cases with respect to the corporate companies. Why it was brought? In order to reduce this 1400 days delay with respect to the commercial projects. So in order to reduce this 1400 days delay, they created a separate bench within the high court which will deal exclusively with the commercial cases, if commercial corporate cases. If because of this separate bench, what will happen? This commercial corporate cases will be completed earlier. It will be done quicker. So that's why we could reduce from 4.3 years to 1.6 years. So what he is telling, instead of having this commercial courts only in high courts, we should also bring in this commercial courts with respect to the district levels also. So that is the recommendation which he is giving. We should bring in this commercial courts at the district levels too. Next, we are solving almost 1500 obsolete archaic laws or obsolete archaic laws means the laws which was brought in earlier in 1950s or 60s, 1950s or 60s or 70s. See, all there are many laws which were brought during the British time which are still existing. So such kind of obsolete economic laws which are irrelevant to the present time should be revoked and new laws should be brought in. So that is what the author is telling. There are almost 1500 laws. So government already has started this process. And next we have to bring in MSME specific resolution process, that is a pre-packed insolvency resolution process which is focusing on MSME. So according to the project Shashakt, which was recommended by Sunil Mehta committee, for any case, for any loans which is less than 50 crore, it should be solved within the bank basis. So they will not be going through this insolvency and bankruptcy code. So all the cases with respect to MSME are less than 50 crore worth only. So all those cases are less than 50 crore worth. So such cases are not being done with respect to this code and they have been dealt within the banks itself. So what this author is suggesting, for MSME level cases, see, an MSME will have got loan of only 1 lakh. As micro unit have got a loan of 5 lakh. For such cases, also we should bring in a process which is MSME specific, so that their cases are also done in a speedier manner. So that is another resolution. So note down all these 4 points which we can quote in our mains answers. So if there is a critical analysis question of insolvency and bankruptcy system, write the positives which we have discussed, write these 4 positives and 4 negatives, and that's all. The answer is over. With an introduction and conclusion, you can easily write a 10-mark question. So the second editorial for the day is about the Farm Acts. So the Farm Acts, which created a huge controversy all over the India. We are seeing farmers protesting all over the India, and how the way the acts was passed in the parliament, and and we also saw that opposition party requested president not to give assent to the bill also. So such a controversy has been created against this Farm Acts, which was passed by the government recently. So you will be anyways preparing in detail about the provisions of the Farm Acts, and UPSC also might ask a question with respect to the new Farm Acts, because this issue is related to the federal structure. So issues pertaining to the federal structure is part of GS paper 2, and agricultural marketing is part of GS paper 3, and hence it is both relevant to paper 2 and paper 3. If that is the case, this editorial, which is written by Ramakumar, who is a professor in the TIS Mumbai, okay, the main theme of the editorial is that the acts are having poor legal validity and it might be called unconstitutional by the Supreme Court, and it also weakens the federal structure. Earlier, if you could remember, see, any laws with respect to agriculture, government doesn't bring the laws directly. They used to bring only the model acts. If you could see, government also had a model APMC Act. Parliament brought only the model APMC Act and asked the states to legislate their own act. Government only brought the model contract farming act and asked the states to legislate their own contract farming act, because it is part of the state list. So because central cannot pass, parliament cannot pass law in those areas. So, but instead of bringing in a model act, what government has done in the recent cases, that they brought in an act in the parliament in the area of agricultural marketing, which is against the federal provision. So that is what the argument of the. So if at all there is a question, we can talk about the provisions of this act, and we will be knowing the positive features. If you could read the Yojana or any other editorial, we will be getting the positive features of the act. But when we are writing the critical analysis, we should also touch upon the unconstitutional nature. For that only this editorial. So note down these points for the criticism. So agriculture, marketing and goods are under the state list. So according to the entry 14, 26, 27 and 28, the 14 which talks directly about the agriculture as state subject, and the entry 26 talks about the trade and commerce within the state, 27 about the production, supply and distribution of the goods, and 28 about the market and fair. Everything is mentioned in the list 2 of the 7th schedule, that is the state list. So purely from all these areas, it is clear that agricultural, marketing, trade and commerce within the state and markets and fair, everything is under the state list. So directly center is not entitled to pass a law there. So that is the first point. But how could the parliament bring in the law? So that is the next question. Parliament brought in a law, it was discussed, it was passed, and president also gave the assent. How this happened? Because parliament brought in this law under entry 33 of the concurrent list. So there is this entry 33 in the concurrent list. So what is this entry 33? So entry 33, if you could see, it clearly states that entry 26 and 27 of list 2. So list 2 state list is subject to provisions of entry 33 of concurrent list. Okay, so entry 26, 27 of the state list are subject to provisions of entry 33 of the concurrent list. So then what the entry 33 talks about? Entry 33 says that following trade and commerce in the production, supply and distribution of the any product or any industry where the control of such industry is declared by parliament is important for the public interest. At the same time, it can also regulate the foodstuffs including edible oils, seeds and oils, cattle fodder, raw cotton or raw jute or any other things. So this list mentions the list of goods and commodities where the central also can legislate. So if there is any legislation with respect to article 26 and 27 of the state list is subjected to the legislation brought in by the center under the entry 33 of the concurrent list. So this is what it talks. So if you could see the history of it, when this entry 33 was brought, entry 33 was brought in an amendment to the constitution, that is after the third constitutional amendment. So why this third constitutional amendment was brought in 1954? So let us go back to the historical story. Even though the story is not relevant directly for the mains, but we have to know this because sometimes UPSC is also asking chronological questions. So in a chronological question, there might be a line that entry 33 was brought in under the concurrent list, or center brought in the third constitutional amendment. So when the center brought in the third constitutional amendment, it brought in 1954. So for those kind of questions in preliminary, it might be useful. Or at the same time, there might also be a statement, center brought in the third constitutional amendment in order to bring in this entry 33. Likewise, there are various possibility of this question being asked in prelims also. So that's why we have to note it down. So why this third amendment was brought? So for that we have to know about the article 369. So article 369 of the Indian Constitution temporarily allows us. So you have to note down this word. Temporarily allows the parliament or the union government to legislate in the matters of agricultural marketing for 5 years. So we all know that Article 369 to 392 deals with the temporary provisions under Part 21 of the Constitution. So these are temporary provisions. That is, it will be having a specific date. So what the Constitution said, temporarily for the period of 5 years, Parliament can legislate with respect to agricultural marketing, which is part of the state list. Agricultural marketing is part of section 27 and 28 of the state list, and it empowers the Parliament to pass the laws for 5 years. Because why it was done? Because of the food security situation of India. See, India just got the independence at that time. At that time, the food production was very low. We were suffering from the setbacks of the Second World War. We also faced the severe famine. So we were having this food security issues, and with respect to the agricultural logistic issues. So in order to cater the needs, we need a uniform law for all over the nations, and that's why it was temporarily given to Parliament. But this temporary provision was made permanent by using the Third Amendment Act. This Constitutional Third Amendment Act in 1954, which was brought in by T.T. Krishnamachari, he was a Tamil Nadu guy only, so who was the Commerce Minister then. He brought in this third constitutional amendment, and he made this temporary provisions permanent. So how they made this provision permanent? What they did was, see, we are already having an entry 33 which talks about the trade and commerce in production, supply, distribution of foodstuffs. So what they did was, they just added one provision, that is entry 26 and 27 are subject to provisions of entry 33. This is the only thing which added. By this, what they convened was, if a parliament passes a law under section 33, then state government, whenever they are passing a law with respect to 26 and 27, is always subjected to this law. So that is what the provision which they brought. So this is the brief history. And the reason why they wanted to make it permanent, because of the food security situation. Within the 5 years, the situation didn't got over. Still, we were facing food security provision. See, in fact, till 1970, in fact, till 1969, we were facing the food security provision. Still, India brought in the Green Revolution. It was criticized severely during the time because it would affect the federalism. Because slowly, center is taking away the provisions of the state list and keeping it in the concurrent list. So it will affect the federalism, and it will lead to the expanding encroachment of the rights of the states. So these were all the warnings given by Ashok Mehta, who was an MP then, and criticized the government's move in 1954. So that fear of Ashok Mehta and Basu is being realized now presently when center brought in this agricultural acts. So there is another judgment which is being quoted by this author. Based on that judgment only, these three farm acts are considered unconstitutional. So that judgment is from the case ITC versus APMC case 2002. So when we are writing our answers, we have to mention the name of the case only. So that will improve our answer writing, that will improve the quality of our answer. So please note down this case name. So this case is pertaining to the dispute which arose between the ITC, that is Indian Tobacco Company, and the APMC, Agricultural Product Market Communities of Bihar. So what happened? Government passed this Tobacco Board Act in 1975 and brought in the entire tobacco industry under the union government's perspective. But still Bihar's APMC Act, that is Bihar's APMC Act, listed tobacco as one of the farm produce. So APMC is nothing but mandi. So Bihar's mandi still had the so Bihar passed the APMC Act, which allowed the Bihar government to levy the taxes on the tobacco in the state government controlled mandis. So what Bihar government was doing? Bihar government was levying tax for any tobacco procured in Bihar by the ITC. So ITC cited that according to Tobacco Boards Act, only central government can do and state government cannot do. So that is what the argument by the ITC, and the court case it went. In that case, Supreme Court provided a judgment that Bihar APMC is also having rights. So Bihar passed that law under section 26, 27 and 28 of the state list, and agricultural marketing is an exclusive jurisdiction of the state, so they are having the rights. Central brought this particular Tobacco Board Act by using the entry 33 provision of the 7th schedule. So what the judgment was that before seeing the validity of a state act, Supreme Court should consider whether the state law. So here what we can see, there is a problem between the union government parliament's law and the state legislature's law. So whenever there is a problem between union government's law and state legislature's law, we have to identify this law talks about which thing. So it talks about agri marketing. Okay. So we have to now analyze agri marketing is mentioned under which list. So agri marketing is purely mentioned under list 27 and 28 of the state list. So agri marketing is purely under state list, that is list 2. So if at all, and we have to see about the central government's act. Central government's act is under concurrent list. So if there is a problem between the law passed by the state under state list and a concurrent list, then the state law prevails. So according to constitution, if you could see, if the state government would have passed the law under concurrent list, if the both central government and state government are making a law in the concurrent list, and if there is a problem, then the parliament's law will prevail. So that is the law of concurrent list. But if state government has brought in a law under its own original jurisdiction and central government has brought in a law in the concurrent list, then the state government's law only will prevail. So that is what the judgment given, and it also upheld that APMC mandi of Bihar can levy mandi fees against the ITC. So this is what the judgment is. So based on this judgment also, we can clearly see that central government brought in this farm acts under entry 33. All the APMCs of the state governments are bringing in their APMC law under section 27 and 28 of the state list. Now if there is a problem between central government and the state government with respect to this new farm act, the laws brought in by the state governments are still valid. Okay, and the laws brought in by central government cannot be considered constitutional. So that is what the ultimate judgment is. So now state governments can overcome or bypass this central's farm act also. So that is what this point is clearly mentioning. So SC ruled in favor of states' rights to legislate with respect to agricultural marketing. So what this author finally states is that whatever center did was constitutional adventurism. They used the provisions of entry 33 and they invoked the concurrent list and they passed the law. But the original jurisdiction still lies with respect to state list. If any law being passed under the state list, the state government's law will prevail and not the central government's law. So ultimately, state government can bypass this 3 farm acts which was brought in by the center by passing their own act. So that is what it's telling, and central government should not try to encourage and weaken the federalism. So that is what the conclusion is. So the third editorial is about the playing catch up in the flood forecasting technology. So this article is about the flood forecasting technology or flood forecasting management. which is used in India, and what are all the shortcomings in that. So this topic is directly related to GS paper 3 disaster management. So in disaster management, flood forecasting is an essential part of it. So the question can be asked there, or it is also part of the science and technology, because it is a technology. So in 2015 there was a question regarding the Indian regional navigational system, that is the NAVIC. So it was the question dealt about how the navigation system works based on the 7 satellites. So similarly, there can also be a question on how the flood forecasting technology is working in India. So in both these areas, both are part of paper 3 only, the question can be asked. So that's why this editorial is very much relevant, and it is also very much relevant for those in the geography optionals too. So the basic premise is what are all the shortcomings with respect to the Indian flood forecasting system, and this article is written by Mr. Harsha. Mr. Harsha is the director of the Central Water Commission, and he is working in Government of India. Before going into the editorial, we have to understand one thing. So in order to understand the flood forecasting technology, we have to understand how the floods take place. So from the mountains, we are having the rivers. When the level of water in the rivers breaches the embankment, or we will be having the dam, and the level of water in the dam increases, they will be releasing the waters from the dam later, and this will be the city which are living in the floodplains of this particular river. So now we have to understand why the flood takes place. Floods takes place because of the heavy rains. So when the heavy rains occurs, because of the cloud formation. So whenever there is a huge cloud formation, that will lead to rain, and this rain will in turn increase the level of water in the stream or the river flowing, or it will increase the level of water in the dam. So this is how it occurs. So when the level of water increases here, that will lead to flood here, and that will affect the city. So how our flood forecasting technology works. So we are having 3 levels of areas of how the flood forecasting technology is working. So the first level is with respect to the IMD, Indian Meteorological Department, and the second one is CWC. The CWC is the institution, that is Central Water Commission, where the author himself is working. And the third level, we are having the district authorities or disaster management authorities who are working on the ground level with respect to the disaster management. So this is a 3 level. So first, Indian Meteorological Department uses the technology and predicts and gives the forecast for the rain. Okay, it gives the forecast for the rain. So based on this forecast, what CWC have to do? CWC takes care of the hydrological data, that is amount of water in the each river, that is amount of water in the each reservoir. So Central Water Commission takes care of those data. So based on the forecast given by the Indian Meteorological Department, the CWC should analyze the see, if they are telling that there will be 80 centimeter rainfall, what CWC should do? How much this 80 centimeter rainfall will increase the level of water in the reservoir or in the stream. So they will be analyzing the level of increase or decrease of the water in the reservoirs and how that might lead to flood. So after doing this analysis, they will be releasing the flood forecast data. This flood forecast data will be in turn given to the district authorities or disaster management authorities, who will in turn alert the people living in the floodplains, and they will take the steps with respect to evacuation if any evacuation is needed because of the flood alert. So this is how it works. So we need to have, so IMD measures provides the rain forecast, that is the weather forecast. Based on this weather forecast, CWC provides the flood forecast, because they will be, based on this rain forecast, they will be measuring the levels of water here, and they will be providing the flood forecast to the district authorities, and who will act upon it. So this is how the flood forecasting management works. So now we should also understand another concept called concept of lead time. So what is this concept of lead time? The concept of lead time is that the time taken, the length of time from the issuance of the forecast and the occurrence of the flood. So when the forecast is being issued, the forecast of the rain is being issued, the time taken between the forecast of the rain being issued and the occurrence of the flood which is taking place. So that is called as lead time. If the lead time is very high, we will have enough time for evacuation, or we will have enough time to take any action. If the lead time is very low, the flood can occur in any time, and that may lead to huge flood. Like if you could see the recent flood whichever took place, like 2015 Chennai floods, or 2017 and 18 and 19, in all the 3 years we had severe Kerala floods, and 18-19 floods were very severe. So all these 3 floods took place majorly because of the improper management of the river basins, that is improper management of the reservoirs. With respect to Chennai, it was Sembarampakam reservoir. With respect to Kerala, it was Idukki dam. So the level of water monitoring there by the CWC and the improper opening up and the untimely opening up of the dam led to the severe flood without any warning. So we had very less lead time with respect to all these occurrences, and that led to severe flood. So our aim now with respect to flood forecasting system should be to increase the lead time. If we are having more lead time, then what we can do, we will be having more time to plan. So if the forecasts are very early, that is if the forecast should be at least 3 days or 4 days early, then we can easily plan the evacuation. So that is the logic of the flood forecasting technology. So but there are many problems with respect to this flood forecasting technology, and that is what is being mentioned in this particular editorial. The lead time is the length of the time from the issuance of the forecast to occurrence of the. It is very crucial to enable risk-based decision making by the district or local administration who are doing the evacuation or disaster management authorities, and to undertake cost-effective rescue missions. So this lead time is very crucial part of the flood management, and it should be higher. So that should be our only aim. So but why it is not higher, why it is always lower? So that is only we are going to analyze in this editorial. This is because there is a severe technological mismatch between the IMD and CWC. So IMD is the first level which is providing the weather forecast, and CWC in the second level which is providing the flood forecast by the hydrological data. But there is a huge mismatch with respect to technological levels and the infrastructural levels. So that is creating all the problems. So that is the first point which the author is mentioning. So what is the mismatch? Indian Meteorological Department uses the Doppler weather radars. So this there are totally 35 Doppler weather radars installed all over this India. This Doppler weather radars provide quantitative precipitation estimation. They provide this high quality quantitative precipitation estimation, so which is providing a lead time up to 3 days. So LT means lead time. If at all we are writing these terminologies in our answers will be very technical and they might be impressed. So use this terminologies. With respect to mains answer writing, our only focus is to note down all these technical words and write in the answers. So by using this Doppler weather radars, we are getting a lead time of 3 days. But parallelly, what is happening with respect to CWC? They are using the outdated statistical methods. So note down all these names: outdated statistical methods, which is providing the lead time of only 24 hours. At one side, so IMD could provide the weather forecast data before 3 days, but the technology used by CWC could only predict the level of water. See what CWC should do, based on the amount of rain which is going to fall, they should be predicting the level of water rise in the streams and level of water rise in the reservoirs. But the technology which CWC is using, that is outdated statistical methods, is providing only 24, that is 1 day lead time. So this mismatch of lead time between IMD and CWC is leading to the improper, inefficient flood forecasting in India. So this is the crucial point. If there is any question with respect to flood management or disaster management or with respect to disaster forecast technology, anything, and recently passed Sendai framework for the disaster management also talks about the forecasting technology. If any question regarding that arises, you have to mention this. You can also, if at all possible, you can also draw a diagram also, which I drew earlier, mentioning the 3 level. You can also draw that roughly and you can write your answer. So this mismatch of the lead time is creating the major problem. The second problem with respect to is that CWC, in order to improve its lead time, with respect to old outdated statistical methods, we are getting only 24 hours lead time. So in order to improve the lead time, CWC brought in a new model called rainfall runoff hydrological model. See, we no need to go and study this model, and we don't need to go and study and all in detail. Just remember and memorize the name: rainfall runoff hydrological model, Doppler weather radar, quantitative precipitation estimation, or outdated statistical methods. Just note down these methods and try to write. Don't need to go and study and all. CWC, in order to increase the lead time from 24 hours to 3 days, they brought in this rainfall runoff hydrological model. But this rainfall runoff hydrological model is not being implemented in entire India. It is just implemented here and there. So according to the NIT Warangal's research, it is being implemented here and there. So the sporadic implementation is also creating the mismatch. So that should be implemented all over India. And third one is about the technological problem with respect to IMD side. Now we got 2 points with respect to CW side. With respect to IND, they are just using 35 Doppler weather radars. But for the in order to cover the India's entire territory, we need 80 to 100 S band. S band is the radio wave band. We need 18 to 100 S-band Doppler weather radars, but we are only having 35. So this shortfall is also a huge region. With respect to America, there is almost, America is 3 times having the greater territorial size than when compared to India. They are having 160 Doppler weather radar. So India should have got at least 80 in order to cover its entire territory, but we are having only 35. So that is a major technological or infrastructural setback for India with respect to IMD side. So 2 points with respect to CWC side, and they are using old technology. New technology is not implementing all over India. With respect to IMD side, only 35 is there, but the requirement is 80. So just note down and write the answer. Okay. So this is the technology currently we are using. So even after using the Doppler weather radars also, we are using only the deterministic model. Deterministic model will just tell you the amount of rainfall that is going to happen. Even though we could measure, see what these Doppler radars are doing, they are just measuring the level of clouds, height of the clouds and reflectivity of the clouds, and they are telling this much rain will come. But global weather phenomenon is very chaotic. Anything can happen with respect to weather. Weather is a very dynamic thing, and climatology is one of the most dynamic subjects. And it is yet to be researched, so we cannot predict anything accurately. In order to predict accurately, we need a ensemble model instead of using so this current model is also called as deterministic model. Just note down this name. It is called as deterministic model. So in order to improve the weather forecast, we have to move from deterministic model to ensemble model. We can write this point also in our answer. We have to move from deterministic model to ensemble model. So only if we are moving, then only our prediction can be more accurate. So this ensemble model is based on the technologies that instead of providing only one forecast, ensemble model will consider all the probabilities. We have to move towards this ensemble model. In order to move towards the ensemble model, what IMD has done is IMD has brought in two supercomputers, that is Pratyush and Mihir. So combinedly, Pratyush is located in the Indian Institute of Meteorology, Pune, and Mihir is located in the National Center for Medium Range Weather Forecast, Noida. So combinedly, these two supercomputers is having the speed of 6.8 petaflops. 6.8 petaflops. These supercomputers are deployed by IMD in order to move towards ensemble model, but still that is not enough because we are just using 35 radars. But government has started with the Pratyush and Mihir. So note down this Pratyush and Mihir with respect to preliminary point of view. So what is the way forward now? Way forward is we have to improve our telemetry infrastructure, that is increase the number of Doppler weather radar and increase the technological compatibility. There should be good compatibility between IMD and CWC. That is the second thing. And we should also bring in the capable workforce. That is, we have to provide the skill development, and the workforce and engineers who are working in the supercomputer should be trained enough. Only if all these things happens, we can have at least 10 days of lead time. Now presently we are having 3 days lead time in some area and 24 hours lead time in some area. So by implementing all these things, we can move to the 10 days lead time as done in USA or Europe. So that is the way forward. The fourth editorial for the day is about the reimagining the education system in an India at 100. The author here imagines how the education system of India should be at 2047 when India attains the age of 100. So that is what the author is imagining. If you could note the title of the editorial itself, it will be similar to how the UPSC asks the essays. If you take the essays which UPSC is asking, at least one essay will be for the education. Among the 8 essays which UPSC is giving, at least one essay will be surely for education. And if an essay is coming with respect to education, and I am sure that you can quote all the 5 points mentioned in this editorial for that essay. The author is Mr. Debashish Chatterjee, and he is the director of IIM Kozhikode. So he is writing this editorial from the teachers and the tutors point of view, how the education should be. So here author talks about 5 transformative principles. What are all those 5 transformative principles that are required to transform our education system in 2047? Okay, so when we are reaching the 100th year of Indian independence, each individual student in India who is coming to an education system, who is coming into the education, should be converted into a competent and compassionate human being. So how to transform the student into a competent and compassionate human being? For that, the author is giving 5 important principles which are required. So, and we will see those 5 principles which the author suggests. The first point which author talks about is autonomy. Here author is telling is that the one first transformative principle is that each and every individual education institution should be provided with autonomy, and that autonomy should not only be through a legislative framework, that is through legislations parliament can give autonomy to any college. Like recently we also passed this Indian Institute of Management Bill 2017, which aimed at providing autonomy to the IIMs. Even though the government is providing legislation, that legislation only is not enough to provide autonomy. That autonomy should be there in the college as the culture of the college. Autonomy should be the culture of functioning of the college, and it should be enabled by the government by providing the proper environment and proper infrastructure. So the first thing is autonomy should be provided not only through the legislations but also through by providing good infrastructures and good environment. So if we are providing autonomy in these areas, automatically the performance of the college will improve. So that is what the author is telling in the first area. And he is also talking about the cyclic relationship. If the performance of the college is improving, automatically that will further improve the autonomy of the college. If a college is performing well like IIT or IIM, there will be a social community or citizen centric movement where they will itself demand for the autonomy of the college, and naturally government will be inclined to provide more autonomy. Like if you could see IITs and IIMs, they are of high quality and they are providing good results, and automatically government is providing them autonomy. So it will be autonomy will be naturally flowing in. You just need a trigger here. So that is what the author is mentioning. So how that can be achieved? By providing autonomy in teaching methods. The way the professors are teaching the class, there the autonomy should be given, and way the curriculum which they are selecting, there the autonomy should be given, and the governance. The government should not interfere in the governance affairs of the college, and it should be managed only by the entire college administration, and only the regulation work should be done by the government. So provide the autonomy, that will automatically improve the performance, and that improvement in performance will provide the autonomy. If this is happening, then we can naturally improve the quality of the education. So that is what the author is mentioning. We can actually draw this schematic diagram also when writing the answers. The second provision which author is talking is about the learning method, how the teaching is being done. So this learning process should be technology driven. That is what the author is mentioning. Like how we brought the smart classes and smart schools, likewise there should be this new technology like smart desks or smart chairs, which is going to transform the education. Like the students will naturally have a screen in their desk, and through that screen they will be experiencing some 3D animations and all those things, and their chairs will have the sensor to monitor the students cognizant level, the amount of attention the student is having, and all those things. So such kind of technology driven learning process should be given. And the four important process of an institution is creation, dissemination, accreditation, and monetization of knowledge. So if you take any education institution, the four important function of the education institution is to create the knowledge, disseminate the knowledge to the students, accreditation of the knowledge, that the knowledge should be recognized, and finally monetize it. Monetize it means through innovations and through new discovery they have to monetize it. So that through research and development, that is what they are telling. Research and development should also be there. So create knowledge, disseminate knowledge to student, provide a proper accreditation to it, and monetize it through R&D. So this is what the ultimate objective of an education institution, and that should be technology driven. Okay, and the learning process should be individual specific. That is, each individual will be having different competency levels. So now our education system can be structured in such a way that each individual is getting the education specific to themselves for their own advantage and disadvantage. Like one person can be a fast learner, another person can be slow learner, and we can provide that individual specific education and context specific education by knowing the background of the person and what level of premise that person is coming to the college. Like that we can provide individual and context specific education to that individual with the help of technology. So this is the second important transforming principle which the author is mentioning. The third is transdisciplinary nature of the subjects. That is, the subjects which is being taught in the college should be transdisciplinary nature, because the problems which we are facing in this world are complex in nature. So complex world need complex multidisciplinary expertise in order to understand the real life problem. Take for example of COVID-19. This COVID-19 is the best example for the complex multidisciplinary problem. That is, the challenges of the COVID-19 has thrown before us the requirement of medical scientists at one side, then economists, then historians, then architects, health workers, political scientists, then police personnel. So expertise at all these levels were required in order to tackle this COVID-19. So like that, each and every problem in this world is getting complex structures. In order to solve those complex problems, we should have a transdisciplinary friendly education. So what is this transdisciplinary or multidisciplinary education? So there should be the smooth coherence between the multidiscipline. That is, if a person is going and learning physics, he should not only be restricted to learning physics, but also there should be some coherence of his learning with physics, and there should be some link with the chemistry department too. If a person is going and learning computer science engineering, his process will not end there. He should also have a transdisciplinary connect with respect to mechanical engineering, or he should have a connect with respect to civil engineering. There should be this coherence. The college should enable this multidisciplinary and transdisciplinary approach, so that we are easily facing this global problems which require the complex solutions. And the fourth problem which the author is talking is about the technology and innovation. That is, the learning experience should move from cognition to immersion. That is, now our present learning experience is about sitting in classroom and listening to the classes in a vocal way. The teacher will be speaking and the student will be listening to it. So the cognition of the student is needed. But how it should transform through technology and innovation, the learning process, the education process should take the student into a new environment. The teaching should not only be about listening to teacher, but it also should be a process of an experience. Okay, so the knowledge should be transferred to students not only through text in the board, but also through visual, audio and tactical immersive experiences. That is, for example, if you are studying anything about rainforest, through virtual reality, if you are wearing those virtual reality glasses, we can directly go to a rainforest and see how the rainforest is, how tall the trees are, how the biodiversity is rich there, how the tiger is being there. So likewise, the education system should not only be about the text way or vocal way of transferring education from teacher to student, but it also should be an immersive experience. So teaching should not only be about listening, it should be about experiencing. So it should move from cognition to immersion. Just note down this terminology and write in your answer. Write in a bold way and underline it. That's it. That will provide you the marks. It should be transforming from cognition to immersion, text to audio, visual and tactical immersive experiences. And the next point which the author is talking about, the value and cultural driven education system. That is, the ultimate aim of the education system is must be to provide three important core values. That is, authenticity or satyam, sustainability or nityam, or wholeness or purnam. So these three principles should be imbibed in the education system. Authenticity or satyam means the education system should be authentic, and it should be true, and it should be suiting to the local culture. It should be suitable to the local environment where each individual is centered. Like, for example, if I am from Tamil Nadu, I have to study about the Tamil Nadu history. So I should not be sitting here and studying only about the national history. I should also be studying about Tamil Nadu history. So likewise, authenticity should be brought into the system. And nityam, sustainability. Sustainability is the future. The entire education system should bring in this sustainability and sustainable development in the education system. And the wholeness, that is, the education should always be inclusive, and it should provide that purnatvam, that is, everyone should be included in the education process, and it should teach inclusivity in the college level itself. So that should be the ultimate value which should drive. If all these things are being taken care of, if these 5 things are taken care of, we can easily convert that one individual student who is coming to the college into a competent and compassionate human being. So that is what the author is telling. So we can make a competent and compatible human being at 2047. So the final editorial for the day is about the scissoring the DNA or CRISPR-Cas9 technology. So this CRISPR-Cas9 technology was awarded the Nobel Prize for Chemistry this year. So Nobel was awarded to Emmanuel Carpentier and Jennifer Doudna for inventing this unique technology which allows her to edit the genes. Through this, it enabled the gene editing. Through gene editing, it revolutionized a lot with respect to medicine. So that's why they were awarded this Nobel for this year. In this editorial, I am not going to discuss about the technology behind the CRISPR-Cas9, because for that you can see another video whose link I have posted in the description box. Now in this portion, we'll just discuss about the pros and cons of this CRISPR technology. You see that video for further understanding of the technology itself. So this is just about the pros and cons here. So this topic is directly relevant for us in GS paper 3 science and technology. In that area, we are having this topic called awareness in the field of biotechnology. So directly the question can come there. So that's why it is relevant there. So the points to be noted is, first, the pros. So this CRISPR technology, through gene editing, it has provided the cure for many genetic diseases such as thalassemia, sickle cell disorder, or muscular dystrophy. All these diseases were genetic diseases which are inherited, and with this gene editing technology, we can cure those diseases and save those people. The second is it has revolutionized the cancer treatment. It is having highest potential to kill the cancer cells, so we can use it there. Next, we have developed a lot of new varieties of crops which are having special capabilities like drought resistant. So these drought resistant crops can be used in the dry areas for the cultivation, and high yielding crops and various other technologies. So these are all the main prominent application for this technology. But even though it is having this prominent application, there are severe threats with respect to this gene editing technology. The first threat associated with this technology is that of the designer babies. If this technology is allowed, in future we might be creating the babies which are designed to have a specific qualities which are considered to be supreme, which are considered to be perfect. Through this we will be creating perfect babies. If these perfect babies are being created, in future it might lead to formation of eugenics. The concept of eugenics means we will be allowing only the specific species with the perfection to live. All the other genetic variation or individuals who are not perfect must be killed. So this idea also drove Hitler to do the genocide. Hitler did the genocide and killed the Jews considering the same concept of eugenics. So this is having the huge problem of enabling this designer baby syndrome or eugenic syndrome that might affect the genetic diversity of the human species. So it is ethically very big threat. Second thing is, in this Cas9 allows us to identify a particular gene sequence and cut it and replace it with the new gene sequence. But most of the cases during the trials, they found that it is introducing the unexpected off-target cuttings. That is, gene editing is taking place in the unintended areas where we didn't intend to create any editing. So outside the intended editing sites, if such editings take place, it will be a solution which is bringing in the new problems, and it is further complicating, and it is further triggering many mutations and diseases. And third thing is, in many cases, even though we are telling that it is capable of curing cancer, in many cases it is inducing the cancer. So how this is happening means, see, our body is having this immune response through p53 proteins. Whenever this Cas9 enters the body, our body is thinking that this Cas9 as the alien species, and it is triggering this p53 proteins, and these p53 proteins are going and killing this Cas9. Cas9, which came as a medicine to cure the cancer, is creating an immune system response. This immune system response is indirectly killing the Cas9. Killing of this Cas9, what is happening? It is also resulting in the unexpected off-target impacts, which is creating further damage and inducing the cancer. In a few occasions, this Cas9 itself led to the inducement of cancer in the body. So that is one threat. And it can also be used as the weapon of mass destruction. That is, if this technology is going into the wrong hands, what will happen? They might develop a virus. We are now living in a times of pandemic. So through this technology, we can develop viruses which can be vaccine resistant. So we can make a virus which can never be killed by the vaccine. If such viruses are being developed and it is being distributed, that will be a huge threat to entire humanity. So it might lead to the development of bioweapons. Okay, so that is a very big threat with respect to this technology. So these are all the cons. See, most of the cases we know the positives and we can write about it. So noting down the cons of this technology will help us in critically analyzing this technology if UPSC is asking, because UPSC will tend to ask that. Now, what is the way forward? What we can do now? The way forward is to create a global governance and protocol, like the Cartagena protocol for biosafety, which we are having. Similarly, a global governance biosafety protocol with respect to gene editing we can bring in, and we can create a global institutional model to implement it, like how we are having a protocol to eliminate the chemical weapons or weapons of mass destruction or nuclear weapons. We can also have a protocol for elimination of or misuse of this technology. We need this technology and we need to develop it further, but still we need a protocol to control the misuse. Second thing is, each nation should bring in their own national legislation with respect to DNA technology. Like Indian Parliament introduced this DNA technology bill 2018, but it wasn't passed. So such bill should be introduced in order to protect from misuse of this technology and to protect the privacy of the patients. And the next one is, implementation of this technology must be done after proper trials. We should not be in a hurry to implement this. Now only we have generated the first generation technology. See, this technology was developed only in 2012. Within 8 years they provided the Nobel. It is one of the earliest trigger for a Nobel. So we are just in the first generation of the technology. Still we need a lot of time, because this technology will improve. Like when we brought in the 1G, 2G, 3G. In 4G only we attained the best internet connections and best mobile communication. Now with respect to Caspar, we are just in the 1G. So we need second generation, third generation and fourth generation technological advancement so that this technology is sophisticated and useful for the masses. So for that we have to wait. We should not be in hurry to implement this. We have to develop more, and we should maintain the caution. So we have come to the end of this video. So today we discussed the 5 editorials of the past week. So note down all the points and revise it regularly. For those of you who are seeing this video for the first time, this is the 7th edition of this series. Already we have made 6 videos before preliminary examination. So please see those videos and catch up. So thank you guys. Let us meet next week with another 5 videos.